Thank you everyone for taking time to join us. We're delighted. Today we're going to talk about tapping into this 1.3 trillion, not million, trillion dollar rollover opportunity with care and confidence. A few quick housekeeping matters. We are recording today's conversation and plan to share it with you following today's discussion. Let's jump in and let's move into introducing our panelists. Let's begin with Courtney. Do you mind saying a quick hello?
Sure. Hello, everyone. Thank you for joining us for today's webinar. Courtney Haddad, Chief Compliance Officer of Concurrent Investment Advisors and RIA based out of Tampa, Florida, with offices throughout the country, about 100 to 120 advisors and about 13 billion in assets under management.
Thank you, Courtney. Mr. Thornton?
Hey, good afternoon, everyone. My name is Kevin Thornton. I am the head of sales for AE Wealth Management. We're a $43 billion RIA TAMP based out of Topeka, Kansas. We work with independent financial advisors all over the country, about 500 offices currently that we support, either IARs or third-party RIAs. So great to be here today. Thanks for having me on.
Thank you, Kevin. Rob?
Hi, everybody. Rob Dearman, the Chief Innovation Officer for a consultancy, DCG Insight. I help broker-dealers, RIA aggregators, fintechs, and PE firms solve technology-enabled problems. A lot of that going into risk management. I grew up in the industry herding cats for a living with the third largest independent broker-dealer firm, National Planning Holdings. Also co-founded Curian Capital, the third largest TAMP platform. Before I ran strategy for the parent company, Jackson National. So I'm also on the U.S. Board of Advisors for InvestorCom, and I do that because I really believe that InvestorCom does a great job at creating value for end clients and using technology to scale that service experience. Happy to be with you today.
Thank you, Rob. And thank you to our panelists for making time. It's going to be a lively discussion. Ed Wagner should be here. Oh, there you are, Ed. I just saw you on my Zoom screen. Over to you, Ed.
Oh, hi, everyone. I'm Ed Wegner. I am the head of the governance risk and compliance practice for CRC Oyster. We provide compliance solutions for broker dealers, investment advisors, and private funds. I manage like I said, the governance risk and compliance group, and happy to be here.
Thank you, Ed. And my name is Parm, and I'll be your host for today's conversation. For folks who are new to InvestorCom, we are a leading software provider for wealth managers across North America, and our award-winning platform is known for its intuitive design and helping eliminate compliance risk to help foster growth for the wealth practice. For the purpose of today, we're going to jump into the agenda. We'll begin with exploring this enormous trillion-dollar market opportunity. What's it all about? What does it mean to the wealth management practice, and how can firms take advantage of this? Next, we'll explore this intersection of compliance and growth, and the conversation will result in actionable insights for our audience. And then finally, we'll take a look at how leading firms are shaping their rollover strategies to build trust, resilience, and long-term value. All right, with that said, let's jump into the conversation here. Because of the enormity of the opportunity at hand, I think it's best, maybe we start with you, Kevin. LIMRA, an industry association, projects rollover activity to grow from 855 billion to over $1 trillion. Where do you see the greatest upside for firms like yours to capture this opportunity?
Yeah, it's a great question. So, I mean, honestly, as you look at the demographics and the aging population with pre-retirees, that's something that our firms typically target and work with in the pre-retirees, retiree world. And so there's a vast opportunity, to be completely honest. You can offer personalized guidance on rollover options, consolidation, and income planning for these clients that are coming into, almost retirement or talking to them about it. The rollover world has drastically changed since the PTE 2020-02 rule, and it's made things a little bit more difficult for advisors to just roll over 401ks and things like that. Well, what's been great about that is digital platforms like yourselves, InvestorCom, that can help make it easier and more seamless for those retirees or pre-retirees to help get their assets rolled over to an IRA or something where you can manage it, which we're more like holistic financial planning. So we address, wealth management, taxes, income planning, insurance needs, things like that. And so you can't really truly do all those things unless you have all of the assets under one roof within the firm. And so I think the more educated and more efficient and digital you can become, the greater your opportunity is to capture this 1.3 trillion. I mean, people are retiring by droves every week. I think I read a stat that on average weekly 70 or every day 77,000 folks are hitting the age 65 right now. And so I'm a Kansas City Chiefs fan. That's the size of Arrowhead Stadium, so that's pretty crazy to think about that being filled up every day with retirees and people hitting that 65 demographic. And so there's a ton of opportunity out there, and we've actually seen a lot of that. I mean, the more advanced you can get with the tax planning and how you're going to roll over the assets, giving clients an actual plan instead of it just sitting in a 401k where they don't know or have any idea how to allocate things. I think there's a huge opportunity from that standpoint.
Amazing points. So ultimately, those assets are cared for a lot better when there's a higher degree of care and control of those assets. Kevin, you touched on this the rate of folks retiring, and maybe Rob, we can kind of double click on that with the average rollover amount that's, as it's stated on the slide, amounts of those age 50 to 74 have doubled to 220K. How does this demographic shift change the competitive landscape for advisors, in your opinion?
So, we've been talking about this generational wealth transfer moment for decades. We've been waiting for these 76 million baby boomers to retire, and now they're doing that. So there's $1 to $2 trillion every year moving from wealth accumulation to either income generation or capital preservation from an allocation and a financial planning goal perspective. Right now, there's $48 trillion held by Americans over the age of 70. The average 401k balance, according to Fidelity, is at just about $280,000. And so, what we're seeing is that at this time in life, when retirees and near retirees have finally sort of hit the other side of the rainbow, and they're switching from build, 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 grow, grow, grow to now I need to make this last, right? What they're not doing is looking for a cheap stock pick. They're not looking for a product. What they're looking for is their last trust-based relationship that they can ride into the sunset. And so this is not about transaction. If you're a product pusher, if you're somebody looking to make a high commission and that's it, one and done, this is not the demographic for you. And so who's going to thrive and survive? It's the people who recognize that with larger balances, the stakes are higher. And the wrong move can have a decades-long consequence on your book. So the competitive battleground is about trust, right? And so what we say, we use an acronym. I am the king of acronyms, Parham knows. And so my acronym for this is CARE, C-A-R-E. Compare, analyze, do your homework, recommend the solution, but then explain it in the context of a financial planning. Because advisors who care are going to win rollovers because trust beats pitch every time.
Love it. You started early today with your acronyms, Rob, and it's bang on. I totally hear your perspective, and looking at it from the sort of the advisor's lens. Maybe we can sort of turn the lens from a compliance perspective. And Courtney,
Yep.
obviously, you mentioned off the top you're an InvestorCom client, but what compelled your firm to look for a digital solution versus, I'll call it, the status quo?
Sure, sure. So, well, first and foremost, condolences to Kevin after the Chiefs game on Sunday. But no, from my perspective, so all of my, answers obviously are going to have that compliance component to them. And, several reasons why we looked at digital solutions. So historically, rollover documentation has traditionally been handled through manual processes. So checklists, spreadsheets, I mean, we were using PDF forms. But let's be honest, the rule really places a fairly high documentation, disclosure, and oversight obligations on, RIA firms or, firms in general. And so from a digital solution standpoint, I really think, having solutions like this that can quickly generate, standardized reports showing the analysis that Rob was talking about and being able to deliver the necessary client disclosures, making it one, easier for clients to see the costs and the comparisons, as well as the services that are being provided by their financial advisors. I really think a digital workflow, is able to automate, comparisons with the fees, the services, and the investments. One of the other things I was thinking of when I was looking at this was, scalability with a digital solution. And, obviously a manual approach is not going to be scalable as we look at the rollover volumes that we're discussing today that are coming as an opportunity for everybody. And then finally, from my perspective, I've seen, digital solutions being a benefit from our recruiting standpoint only because it helps to differentiate us when recruiting advisors who want less compliance friction, which they seem to get in a lot of instances.
Clients friction. You said it first, Courtney. That's our northern light. So star, I should say. Maybe on that point, and with all efforts to reduce that friction point for advisors, and there's a study out there from Cerulli and Associates, and it finds that 63% of all rollovers conducted in the US are advisor-led or intermediated. What does it signal to you about the importance of documented advisor involvement in protecting both the investor as well as the firms that they work for?
Well, first of all, I'm a Chicago Bear fan, so I have no dog in this fight at all. But no, it's a great point, Param. I think that as Rob had mentioned, just the need for that clients have in this space, they need trusted advice, and so it doesn't surprise me that most rollovers are advisor led. It's a great tool. I mean, there's a lot of decisions that have to be made, and it impacts a lot of issues, including, how best to save for retirement, how to make sure that the money lasts, how to navigate things like taxes and estate planning, making sure that you have the products and the services that are available to you. And the important thing, I think, to your point, is that, you're able to document those consideration and put documentation around the context that gave rise to the recommendations that are being made. So, and that's one of the areas where I think the regulators have been a little bit inconsistent in terms of how they've been approaching it. When the SEC issued their staff bulletin on account type recommendations and talked about rollover advice as an account type recommendation. The first thing that they did is they mentioned that how they were aligning the standards for broker dealers and investment advisors and trying to leave as little light between the two requirements as possible, but then also aligned the requirements under both of those regimes to what the DOL was doing as part of their PTE. So regardless of what happens in terms of the PTE with respect to what's going on in the courts currently, the SEC has said that this is something that's covered by Reg BI. It's covered by the fiduciary requirements under the Advisors Act. So firms need to comply with that. And one of the things that they said when they issued Reg BI is that you didn't necessarily need to document the basis for all the recommendations. But then in the staff bulletin, they sort of took a step back and said, well, yeah, you don't have to, but we don't know how you can demonstrate compliance without documenting the basis for your recommendation. So from the regulatory standpoint, based on that, I think the SEC is expecting more documentation than less. But it's also a good practice. I mean, when you're making recommendations, you want to be able to demonstrate, what was the basis for making this recommendation? What were the things that were considered? They're really focusing on making sure that when making these recommendations, that the advisor understands the costs that were involved in the employer plan and how that compares to the costs and the account that's being recommended. So being able to demonstrate that you had either access to that information or reasonable benchmarks, and then using that in your the calculus that you make to make the recommendation, and then why you ultimately ended up making the recommendation that you did, it's going to be important, both from a regulatory standpoint, from a compliance standpoint. As Courtney had mentioned, compliance is going to want to make sure that they're assessing these recommendations. They're going to want to be monitoring to make sure that the advisors are following the firm's procedures. But then also just from a client service standpoint, really kind of having a good understanding of the information that was assessed and how they relate to the recommendations that were made is going to be very important.
100%. And thanks for reminding us of the SEC guidance notes. It's been a while, but it still holds true. So that's fantastic. Thank you, Ed. Rob, as you're advising your clients on their tech stack and the opportunities ahead, there is this sort of intersection between what the technology can provide and then the compliance requirements that are being outlined, or I'll call it the regulatory expectations. How are you advising your clients as it relates to that intersection? What do you see kind of lying ahead?
Well, the technology, just like with e-sign enabled digital account opening, just like with, auto tracked trading and rebalancing tool, the technology holds the potential to really transform this part of the interaction. Almost like my Green Bay Packers have transformed expectations in the NFC North. I got to get my team in there.
Never got to rebuttal on the Eagles comment, by the way, the Eagles Chiefs, by the way. So that's coming later. That was a false start on you, Courtney.
We'll wait for Courtney to throw her red flag in a second. But the digital tools have shifted compliance really from being a manual back office burden to a frontline enabler. I mean, let's think about this. What do investors want? They want timely and accurate information to make an informed decision. What do the regulators and the chief compliance officer want? They want consistent documentation and rationale. And what do the advisors want? They want an efficient way to tell their story. Now, too often, I get brought into the situation after a chief compliance officer has designed yet another form. And they think, well, at least I made it fillable. At least it's in Quick or Laser App or DocuPace, but it isn't integrated to the account, to the order. That data doesn't flow into the back-end surveillance systems. Maybe it's only visible in the broker-dealer's back office, but the OSJ or other field supervision personnel don't see it. Or if they do, they only see it as a printed copy. Introducing a forms-based freeform text solution is just inventing friction. And so digital tools like Rollover Analyzer do a really good job of striking a balance between the need for accuracy, consistency, and efficiency, because it gives you a consistent way to apply your WSPs every single time. We saw this in the first two rounds of examinations, is regulators, all the regulators, but FINRA specifically cited documentation and rationale and the lack of consistency across BDs and RIAs as one of the top deficiencies in their exams where they looked at rollovers. When I have a technology solution, I can essentially automate NIGO. You can't even submit unless you've got the right level of documentation about service, fit, and fees. And I've got the ability to make sure that it is consistent with my written supervisory procedures at my firm. Technology is the only way to do that. And if you can go the next level and design a process that helps the advisor tell the story about their value proposition, now you've got the best of all possible worlds. So as you might have picked up, Param, the acronym for this one is when compliance is aced, ACE, accuracy, consistency, efficiency, advisors are going to spend less time checking boxes and more time building relationships.
Just to chime in on that too, I will say, like Rob hit the nail on the head. We have had a lot of advisors struggle finding. So we have a form you can fill out for the rollover form on your own. A lot of our advisors have struggled to find the fees and all of that stuff, and so we've run into issues where some of them they just don't fill it out, and then that becomes a compliance issue for us and things like that. So that's why having technology like this is key, because it's so much more simplistic to be able to find those fees, especially from 401k plans. It's a little bit easier to find on IRAs and things like that, but specifically 401k to find contribution plans, et cetera. I mean, that's a huge benefit.
Completely agree. I mean, that exercise of just obtaining costs, and I'm just thinking about this from multiple dimensions. I mean, there's the compliance angle, which is, hey, where did you source this data from, right? Did you just look up, Google something? Did you search the web, or is it from the Form 5500 database? If so, whoever's had the misfortune of looking up or querying the Form 5500 database, like how did you make sense of all those tables and forms? So there is some value in streamlining that. And that particular feature alone, on average, when you polled our advisors who are using our technology, has saved advisors 1.7 hours. And I believe it. I spent the summer trying to figure out how we can scrape the Form 5500 database, and we had to just change course on that path. So that there is an element of consistency that can drive value. And maybe this is a great segue for you, Courtney, as you're sort of thinking about this from a compliance perspective. What are the pockets of value that can be created through that rollover recommendation process?
Right. Before I answer that, I would definitely say from our firm, the costs, you're correct. That seems to be the biggest hurdle our advisors have in gathering that information. So we've done numerous, communications and webinars internally for giving guidance and best practices on gaining that information and being able to get that. But definitely from a value added benefit of having this consistent approach, I really think it becomes a competitive advantage, protecting us as the firm as well as, our financial advisors and, building that client trust with the documentation that's generated. And for me and my compliance team, creating really usable data for my compliance team for doing the, retrospective reviews, all while improving the overall efficiency of the process internally as well as for our advisors. And, I really think, having that unified process, reduces the confusion and ensures that the clients are actually getting the same quality of explanation and disclosures, regardless of who they're working with within our team. So, 100 advisors or 200 advisors, at least it's all the same output.
That's it. That's that sense of consistency, in my opinion, and I completely agree, Courtney, that it brings a certain level of, I'll call it compliance moat around one's practice, right? Everybody across the business is using a similar process. They're going to the same data source. They're getting the same type of disclosures that are being created, and it reduces the idiosyncrasies of how Parham communicates differently than Kevin and Courtney. So on that point, Ed, there's been, I'll call it misinterpretation or confusions when, non-legalese folks are reading the 2020-02 requirements. To your point, there's been multiple court cases. And then the spirit or the principles underlying Reg BI. And there's been some folks who've said, look, disclosure of a rollover is enough. And whether it's an educational exercise or an actual recommendation, what do you say to your clients who are sort of contemplating the different paths of going perhaps around those requirements?
Well, and that's an important point, is that, there's a big difference, and these are two separate requirements. That the requirement to make sure that the recommendation is in the client's best interest, versus the requirement that they disclose certain information. With the PTE, you have to make sure that it's in the client's best interest, and then you have to disclose to them how you came to that conclusion. So that is a disclosure, but you're disclosing that, you ensured that it was in their best interest. A lot of the disclosures are around the conflicts that you have, and making sure that the client understands what conflicts that you have so that they can assess the recommendations that you're making, and with full transparency around those. So the important thing is that regardless of the disclosure requirements, you still have to make sure that those recommendations are in the client's best interest. And so all the things that we had talked about before in terms of making sure that you have access to the right information about costs, that you're assessing that information, and that you're making sure that whatever recommendation that you're making to the client is in their best interest, considering the costs, the services that are available, and the other things that the SEC and the DOL lay out is really important. We've talked to a number of firms that talk about the difference between providing education versus recommendations, and the DOL did, and the SEC have said that there isn't a requirement if you're solely providing education, but it's a very narrow set of communications that fall under education. And so what I've seen, having been a former regulator, is that if firms are saying we're solely providing education and therefore we don't have this requirement, they look at that very skeptically, and they're going to want to look at the communications that were made and make sure that they truly were education only type reviews. So I would say the first thing that I would do if you're planning on relying on the education exemption is to make sure you understand what you're allowed to do in terms of only providing education. Make sure that you have really good and clear policies and procedures in terms of what type of communications you can do that would fall under education. Make sure you're training your advisors to make sure that they understand, and that you have a way to monitor regularly to make sure. So if you're going to go that route, which I'm not sure if that's the best route to go, I would make sure that you have all of those things in place. But we talked about this market and how big this market's going to be, and how important it is to have good, reliable advice. And if you're providing advice and recommendations, you're going to fall under this regime. So the important thing to do is to make sure that you have access to the right information, that you're using that information effectively to make good recommendations, that you're documenting that, and that you have a compliance program that can look across and make sure on a regular basis that you're complying with the requirement. So I think that's how we've been working with clients in this regard, and tools like this are very effective. We've seen firms that try to use a manual approach have really been struggling, both in terms of getting the right information. And one of the things we hear from compliance officers is the thing that keeps them up at night is just what type of recommendations are being made, what type of documents are being collected. And if you do have a manual approach, you're not going to know that until the examiners come in and start looking at those things. And so being able to have a system so that you can monitor that real time is really important.
Fabulous, fabulous. And I think for whoever's listening to this, I think we'll have a lot better understanding of the regulatory requirements. Given your insights, really, really helpful. Let me just take a quick pause and sort of share with the audience here sort of our observations. I know there's $1 trillion market opportunity, and we took a look at a 12-month period for one of our clients and said, look, are we seeing a similar level of uptake in industry rollover activity? And quite honestly, we were floored. In a 12-month period across 800 advisors, approximately 800 advisors, 739, as you can see on the screen, we saw over 14,000 rollover recommendations being made. Now, take a minute to consider that. If that 14,000 is being done in a manual way, people keying in, Rob, you touched on fillable PDF forms. Imagine the weight and the burden that's created across the business, not just compliance, not just the advisor, the end-to-end, the supervisory function who has to go through and comb through 14,000 recommendations and the hundreds and hundreds of data points that are presiding that type of recommendation. On the business front, we were even more floored or shocked. We saw the average rollover amount being over $500,000. Let me go back. Cerulli and Associates at $1 trillion market opportunity, 62 or 3% of that is advisor-led. The data that we have garnered from a sizable firm whose pro recommendations, they're realizing $500,000 on average per recommendation. That's a huge opportunity that we've uncovered just with InvestorCom's data, no industry association study. So that's a really, really compelling way that's gotten us to think perhaps there's something bigger here. And maybe Kevin, I could come to you on sort of the advent of technology and compliance as that enabler. From your perspective, how can firms reframe the compliance requirement as a bit of a competitive advantage to build trust and win on the business?
Well, I think, if you try to avoid the conversation with the clients or prospects or things like that, like I've always been a big believer of you're just upfront with people about, hey, have you heard about the rollover rules? Have you, ever been talked to by an advisor or somebody that's done this kind of stuff? Let me educate you on what's going to happen here. And honestly, it leads to a more honest conversation because it's all right there in front of the clients of the things they need to be considering with the rollover advice. And so I think you're building an immediate trust factor with those prospects and clients when you tackle this objective potentially up front. Like, hey, you're not like, if you roll over your 401k, yeah, some things may be similar, some things may be better, some things may be worse. Like you can address those things, comparatively. Like maybe the fees on the 401k you're rolling over are substantially lower, but then you talk about your advisory fees with the clients. Like that just leads to more transparency and tackling that stuff up front. And I think clients appreciate that. I know I do. Like, hey, it's going to come up eventually, so you might as well just address it now. And that's like why they created the Form CRS as well, to talk about like fees, things like that. The regulators have just tried to create more transparency and dialogue. Now, some people may say they've gone too far. We can talk about that another day. But at the same time, they're just trying to increase the transparency that is disclosed to these folks. And I think people really want to hear that kind of stuff. Like they may not know it at the time, but at least you're educating them, which leads to a bigger trust factor if you do land their business. Like you're not going to win everybody's business, but like if you tackle all those hard conversations about the 401k rollover up front, I mean, it's just a much better conducive relationship overall. And that's how you keep clients happy and keep it sticky for you and your firm in the long run. We preach a lot about doing different services and value adds and things like that for your clients to add sticky services so that it makes it difficult to leave. But I mean, trust is the biggest sticky factor. And I mean, there's, like we've talked about, an abundance of opportunity to have those conversations and really trying to dive into a more in-depth combo with those folks.
Love it. That's a tweetable moment. Trust is the biggest factor. Thank you, Kevin.
Yep.
By the way, I reside in Toronto and we don't have an NFL team, so I'll stay out of that conversation. We'll cheer for the Bills just to diversify.
Oh, then you go that way. Okay.
Rob, obviously you're well aware of this as the rollover volumes increase. We've talked about it at length today, but there is the element of standardizing the rollover documentation process. But what else can it do? Is there sort of an overarching strategy that firms and clients can kind of look at and consider in terms of pivoting their practice in a digitized way?
Yeah, what we encourage our clients to do, and I'm actually calling you from New Jersey, a New Jersey hotel room. I was meeting with a client this morning, and this is exactly what we were talking about today. Too often we get on one end of the spectrum, really worried about the new regulation. I remember we went through this when 2111 was revised, and then for variable annuity 1035 exchanges when Rule 2330 came in, and then the Obama version of the fiduciary rule, where we were all looking at Section H and the fee only exclusion, and 401k changes, ERISA changes, and now PTE 2020-02 and Reg BI. We think about how do we stay out of trouble on one end of the spectrum. What is the form or the data that's going to keep me out of trouble, right? From a sort of scarcity, a reactive position. And then on the other end of the spectrum, you've got firms who are trying to figure out, how can I create differentiation? With AI, with data analytics becoming easier, with any computer science intern being able to build apps that amaze you with Cursor and Replit and all of these tools, like, how do I really create differentiation when this funnel of commoditization among broker dealers and RIAs is always in play, right? And so on that side, the creative, the innovative, the abundance thinking, I like with my clients, my consulting clients, to use the Steve Jobs quote. Don't think about the product, think about the experience that you're trying to create for your target persona and work backwards towards the technology. Don't design by demo. Don't just go out there and, hey, look what this tool or that tool can do. And if you work in a broker dealer, especially if you're a chief information officer, you have reps coming to you every week with new tools that they've demoed. Is some new internal wholesaler is showing you some new tool, and it's the best thing since sliced bread. Half of the time it's vaporware, but don't let the truth get in the way of a good story when you're a sales guy. And so what I encourage my clients to do is, let's think about this. Who are you trying to be great for? What kind of advisor, what kind of investor are you trying to be great for? And how are you going to be great for them in a way that's differentiating? Now, when you try to answer those two questions, you quickly have to run into the fact that we are no longer, wealth management is no longer an industry that creates value through asymmetry. I know something you don't know, or I have access to something you don't have access to. Our clients have access to the same stuff we do. They, just like my wife, when she took kids to the doctor's office, she had WebMD up on the phone so that when the doctor was prescribing the prescription, she could double check the side effects for one of my 4 daughters, right? We have more informed investors and advisors than ever before, with greater access than ever before. Asymmetry is no longer value. So what is value? What is value is a warm arm around your shoulder. Okay, I'm going to get personal for a second. My bride of 28 years passed away 2 years ago of cancer. When my Linda died of cancer 2 years ago, I've been in this industry my whole life. I had access to all the data to figure out how to avoid probate and what to do and all that stuff. But the cortisol spikes in my brain, the acute grief that I was going through, didn't allow me to think straight. I couldn't even remember the conversations I had this morning because my brain, overwhelmed by grief, just wouldn't allow me. So what did I do? I called somebody I trusted. And I said, Mike, I can't do this by myself. I need you to help make these decisions with me. So who is that? How do you build trust? That is the most important thing that our advisors can do, is learn how to build deep trust-based relationships. Trust, the acronym is trust. It begins with T, transparency. Transparency in fees, transparencies in the services you're going to deliver, transparency in the rationale for reasonable alternatives and other solutions that you could have offered. Transparency is how you battle the asymmetry problem. R, rationale. The rationale needs to be understood, not just by the advisor. Can't be full of jargon. I'm going to sell you a VA with a GMWB and it's got a bonus and a step up. Are you speaking English? No, you need to talk about the financial planning outcomes in that rationale. Uniformity. You need to be consistent with the husband, with the wife, with the kids, with the next client, because the regulators are going to look for that uniformity. And then S, supervision. You need to be on the same page with your supervisors. Best way to avoid an email, a text, or a call from your OSJ manager is to talk to them when there isn't a problem. Hey, Courtney, are you seeing any trends for me and my reps
Yeah.
that I need to be aware of? That maybe you would offer me some best practices to not have these problems? What proactive consulting would you offer me? How many times has a rep done that, Courtney? Never.
Never. Yep.
Right. And then the last T, tracking. Everybody wants to know what your AI strategy is, right? But I always ask my clients this question first. Is your data AI ready? Do you even have all of your data? Positions, products, transactions, tax lots? Is it consistent across TPAMs, FMOs, ERISA? Do you have the credit interest credited transaction for your fixed annuities? That's one of my favorite ones. Hey, how come your non-traded REIT positions doubled last week? Oh, we've got data issues. Do you even know? So you've got to get your arms around your data first. And in the case of a solution like Rollover Analyzer, I've got a data warehouse that I can learn from. So tracking isn't just, hey, when it comes time for your annual test, can I run a report to show that I've done my sampling rate correct? Tracking means learning from your own data. Because if you actually start trying to dredge best practices, qualitative best practices from your own data, you're going to be that much more ready to actually use that for things like organic growth and practice management improvement. And you're audit ready.
Wow. Rob, first of all, I'm floored. Thank you for sharing that personal anecdote. I think it's sincere and quite honestly exactly what the industry needs. And secondly, I mean, who's getting who? It ultimately comes down to the data. I won't be able to repeat the same acronym that you went through, but bang on, bang on. Thank you for sharing that. Um, let me just share one more thing quickly. I mean, as we embarked on this journey of digitizing that just rollover process, and we saw the value that that's created for our clients. We started to think, what else can we help with on the technology front? And what you're seeing on your screen today is this, when you map that rollover process from meeting your client, establishing trust, um, in the prospecting category, and then going through the suitability and best interest process, and then selecting of the investments. You talked about the GMWBs as an example, Rob. And then last but not least, that transfer process of somebody who says yes, somebody who trusts you enough to say, yes, roll my assets out of my 401k and manage it for me. There is this end-to-end experience that can be digitized that's currently being done by, I'll go on a bit of a edge here and say it's being done manually. So if firms are serious about maximizing this $1 trillion opportunity, there's certainly this end-to-end experience to consider in terms of digitization. But let me pause there and let's ask one of our clients, Courtney, from a business perspective, have you seen any measurable improvements or productivity gains as a result of looking to improve that or digitize that rollover process?
Right. So based on Rob's comments, that's why as CCO, I haven't slept in years, because I am up all night. But from a business growth or advisor or productivity, we've had the digitalized system implemented for with InvestorCom for probably since the beginning of the year. So, from my perspective, we definitely have seen, less time filling out manual forms. So it's 100% improved their productivity, especially, their branch support staff's productivity as well, so that they can spend more time, doing what they do best with their practices and, having those relationships with their clients and continuing to build that trust.
Amen, amen, amen. That's awesome. Thank you. Thank you for sharing that, Courtney. I'll take a quick pause. Folks, whoever's participating on this webinar, please feel free to submit your questions. I should have invited that earlier on, but as always, if you have any questions for our lovely panelists, this is the time to submit it.
Can I ask a question? So like, because we have a lot smarter people on the compliance front on this call than me. Um, I know that state registered RIAs are exempt from the rollover form. However, have you all coached your RIAs, or if you have any state registered RIAs underneath you? Like, do we see that? Do we need to coach them towards doing that kind of stuff as a best practice moving forward? Or is it something that's eventually going to get implemented in your eyes at the state level instead of just the SEC? I don't know who to address that to, but I was just curious.
So we're strictly SEC, so I would defer to the other gentlemen who have that hat of a regulator in the past.
Yeah, I would say that, Mysis, for all the reasons that we talked about today that go beyond just ticking and tying compliance, that the value that you get from all the things that we've been talking about in terms of, guiding you through a process to make an appropriate recommendation, capturing that information, being able to look across recommendations and make sure that you can determine whether or not, from a compliance standpoint, that they're in the client's best interest. The capturing of the data so that you can, down the road, be able to mine that data and use it whether it's AI or through other means, being able to utilize this data in a structured way as opposed to having forms spread out throughout your offices. I think for all of those reasons, I would say whether you're a state registered RIA or a federally registered RIA, that this is an important process that you should go through. And to what Rob and Kevin were talking about before, the, the trust being what makes assets sticky. Being able to utilize processes like this and systems like this, and being able to have those conversations with your client and be able to walk them through how you came to the recommendations that you did and what things you considered, and the differences in the costs, and is really going to engender that trusting relationship, which is going to make those assets sticky and provide that value that Rob was talking about, which is somebody that you can go to when you need them and provide you advice that you're comfortable with.
Thanks.
Rob, any thoughts? I thought you were going to come off mute for a second.
No, it's, in compliance, I get weary sometimes with my own clients that, compliance is viewed as this like necessary evil, forced submissions, minimum standards, bureaucratic burdens, like reactive defensiveness. And like I do the bare minimum in order to do it. And I think that's a real missed opportunity. Maybe it's because we're using the word compliance, and that word kind of like annuity. It's got a bad name. I know, as being the head of strategy at Jackson National, we always wish that we could call it a personalized pension. That's what we wanted to call annuities when people were doing living benefits on a VA. Maybe we need new terms. Like, I'm the king of acronyms, Parham. So what if we let her rip with a relationship integrity platform? So compliance is now your relationship integrity platform. It keeps the integrity in the center of your relationships, but it makes it scalable, right? And I hear people like state RIAs, or I hear people, remember 8424? We got to preserve my safe harbor for my fixed annuities because I wouldn't want to over disclose anything to my clients, he said sarcastically. Hey, how about instead, let's think about how are you going to be great for your clients in a way that continues to get better over time? Instead of just viewing it as another form, another piece of data, the bare minimum I need to keep my regulator and my CCO happy, what if I picked up the phone and I called my CCO and I said, how can we turn this into a sales tool? Again, I bet you Courtney could answer on one hand the number of phone calls she's ever gotten from an advisor. Or Kevin, the sales guy, calls his CCO and says, how do we use this opportunity for this regulatory disruption to actually add and deepen value for investors? I think the firms who do that, and I do have a very small number of top decile firms that do this, they look at every compliance, regulatory, and legal disruption as an opportunity to differentiate and deepen value. I think if you start thinking in that way, in that really foolish way, every time maybe not under this president, but maybe if the pendulum swings back towards a regulatory regime that's more hands-on and more investor protection oriented, if you viewed those disruptions, those forced disruptions, as an opportunity to deepen value in the midst of disruption, you could let her rip.
Let it rip. Love it. Love it. Love it. Rob, thank you. Um, I'm glad we're recording this. I'll go back and save all your acronyms. I've written most of them down. I'm going to recycle and give you credit for them. Folks, we're at 2:52. Let's quickly shift to looking forward and leveraging this opportunity that Rob has eloquently suggested, compliance being giving firms that competitive advantage. And Ed, let me start with you. I'll kind of go off track a little bit, but in your consulting work, how do you coach firms to balance that compliance burden with their growth goals?
Back at me?
Oh, this was at Ed.
Oh, okay.
Well, yeah, and feel free to jump in. And I think for all the reasons that we've been discussing, I don't think that those are opposed ideas. Just like Rob had mentioned, using compliance as a potential opportunity to grow your business. You grow your business by keeping the clients that you have. So having, that relationship where that trust is becoming what's making those assets sticky. They're all things that I think show that having a good compliant program isn't something that's antithetical to growth. I think an effective compliance program can promote long-term growth, but it's not just about growth from the revenue standpoint. It's growth from a margin standpoint, and if you can do this stuff at scale, and you can become efficient, and you can get access to data to help support your advisors in the field to make sure that they're making good recommendations so that they can walk through with the clients to see exactly how the recommendations are being made and the considerations that they're using. It's going to enhance growth and support growth. Where you look at compliance as just an add-on and you have forms that people have to fill out after the fact, that's inefficient, and that's just going to make your advisors upset. It's going to spend their valuable time filling out forms instead of working with clients. So what I would tell clients is that, just like Rob had mentioned, is use compliant. You have to do the compliance anyways. Try to figure out how you can utilize compliance in order to support your growth goals, to support your efficiency and your profitability.
And Parham, step one, don't have the ops and the tech people get in a room and design the solution, write a BRD, and then in the 11th hour, invite the compliance department in and say, can you make this compliant for us? Include compliance in the decision-making and design process from the beginning.
Correct.
You-
And I'm going to
Rob.
start doing webinars with all of you because I've never been called an opportunity.
Right on, right on. Rob and Courtney, you said that with some zest. You really believe it, and I think it sounds like you've been through some incredible opportunities. Let's call it that. As we look forward, Kevin, rollovers are expected to grow 34% over the next 5 years. As someone who's leading growth at your firm, what's the single most important lever there?
I think having a digital tool, because as we've talked about, trust is a big factor. I think having ease of use and the quickest way possible to open up your accounts and roll them all over and things like that, because speed equals trust as well. And so if people aren't adopting a more nimble platform to do digital account opening, to do rollover analyzers, things like that, like this, they're going to miss the boat big time, because you're not going to be able to be as upfront and transparent and build that trust factor with the fees. So I think a digital scalable tool is the biggest opportunity, is the biggest thing you need to harness this opportunity in front of you.
All right. Thank you, Kevin. You've heard it here first. Courtney, looking forward or looking ahead,
Yes. So I know since time is short, I would just say bottom line is firms that are going to come out ahead are, those that don't just say they're acting in the client's best interest, but they're actually proving it. So whether, consistently and effectively.
Excellent comments. Excellent comments. And with 4 minutes left, Mr. Dearman.
So the next frontier of rollover or just compliance technology, I'll give you one last acronym. You ready? So I am doing a lot in AI, and I am doing a lot in this thing called NBA, next best action. Everybody wants to know, how do I use my data, all my data, my CRM data, my financial planning data? Well, guess what? AI note takers means you've got more data. Compliance has more data to worry about, both structured and unstructured, if you save the recordings. But you've got more data to leverage too, right? And so the acronym is, how do I leverage insights from these just-in-time events? Birth, death, wedding, divorce, someone changes their state. Now, to you, it might just be a form. Did you fill the form out correctly? Well, to a practice management director, that's an opportunity to say, wait a minute, did you buy a second house or are you moving to Florida? What's the tax situation in your new state? Why'd you do it? Is it job change? Right? So leveraging insights from events, AKA life, right, means I want to look at that data, leveraging all the data, quantitative and qualitative data, in a way that not only creates opportunities to build and deepen trust-based relationships, but do it in a compliant way. What if we had an easy button that said, well, wait a minute, you've got a minor as a beneficiary on this VA, but you don't have any trust accounts in the household. And the practice management director calls Parham, the rep, and says, why is that? Parham says, I don't know how to do trusts. I don't know a CRT from a CLT from a NIMCRET. Help. Now that becomes that just-in-time opportunity to help the advisor learn in a safe way. You don't have to be stupid, right? But everybody's got an opportunity to grow and expand. And so using that data to expand the value proposition for the advisors is going to help us add more value as an RIA, as a broker dealer. But then using that data to pre-populate maybe that first trust, right? Where I've got the easy button to take the data from the annuity policy and pre-populate the first living trust or what have you. I think the more that we can think about building a bridge between the data and the financial planning outcomes that we're looking for, now we get to kill multiple birds with one stone, which is the opposite of the point I'm trying to make. I'm trying to make a point about life. Leverage the insights from events.
Rob, thank you. Kevin, thank you. Courtney, thank you. Ed, thank you. This has been remarkable. And we're just at time. I'll quickly plug one thing. So following the webinar, as you exit the screen, you're going to get a prompt. If you want to engage with us or anybody of our panelists, you can click on that prompt and we will follow up with you accordingly. And with that said, I'll fast forward and say a very, very sincere thank you to our lovely panelists for taking an hour of your time this afternoon to engage our clients and our audience. Thank you all.